Well, good morning. I'd like to get the meeting started. I think most of you probably know me. I'm Dave Fote. I'm the Registrar for the Contractors Board. I want to thank all of you for coming down this morning to help us obtain additional information regarding the review of the classification for the battery energy storage systems. I just want a little housekeeping. As you probably know, there's restrooms right outside of the front door to the right. We do have water and coffee this morning. As far as how the meeting will be conducted, one thing I will have to ask all of you is that before you speak for the first time, that you would acknowledge that you're okay with being recorded. So we do have video and audio recording this morning. If for some reason you're not comfortable with that, we will shut it off. We didn't notice that for the meeting. So I know Christy Shield is our board counsel. Do you want to add anything to that, Christy?
Yeah, so, you know, when we figured out we were going to get a larger attendance, we wanted to make sure we get an accurate record of your comments. And so under California law, we need your consent to record. We didn't notice it as a meeting that would be recorded. So if you are not interested in being recorded, just say at the beginning of your comments that you don't want to be recorded, and we'll turn off the recording.
What I'd like to do, and also for the mics, we can only have 3 on at any one time. So after you finish speaking, we'd ask that you turn the mic off. I'd like to do self-introductions, if I may. So again, I'll go to my left, if you'd introduce yourself, and also the industry that you're representing. Thank you.
My name is Mark Rodriguez. I'm representing Sunrun and CALSA as the permitting chair.
I'm Barry Cinnamon with Cinnamon Energy Systems, a C46 and a C10 contractor working with CALSA.
I'm Donald Simon. I'm General Counsel for CALSA.
Bernadette Del Chiaro, Executive Director, CALSA.
Brad Hebner, Policy Director of CALSA.
Captain Richard Burt, Las Vegas Fire and Rescue, representing Solar and Fire Education.
Jim Cahill with Sunrun.
Tom Enslow with the law firm Adams, Brado, Joseph, and Cardozo, here today on behalf of the California utility employees and IBEW.
My name is Cliff Ishii. I'm a private engineer in private practice, work for Ishii Engineering. I'm here to testify in regards to the safety of the issues before you.
My name is Marco Cabibo. I'm an independent electrical engineer. I'm here to testify on the safety issues related to battery energy storage systems.
Matt Stoutenberg, General C10, C46, electrical contractor, Peak Power.
Dan Cohey, Morro Meadows Corporation. Bernie Kotlier, representing the Labor Management Cooperation Committee of California and Nevada.
Eddie Bernacchi on behalf of the National Electrical Contractors Association.
Scott Wetch on behalf of the California Coalition of Utility Employees and the California State Association of Electrical Workers.
Mike Janetsky, Contractor State License Board, Chief of Legislation.
Christy Shields, Counsel for the Contractor State License Board.
Tanya Corcoran, Chief Deputy Registrar, Contractors Board.
In the back row. All right, well, very good, thank you. With that, I'd like to begin with the agenda. The first item on the agenda is just a really brief review of the August 6, 2019 Legislative Committee meeting and the motion that came from that meeting. Many of you were present for the meeting. A lot of testimony was obtained regarding this classification issue. I'm just going to read into the record the motion that the Ledge Committee made, and that was to recommend directing staff to prepare regulatory language to permit the C46 contractor classification to install battery energy storage systems on specified residential units with restrictions. with the further recommendation that staff study ESS size, complexity, voltage, and risk, and bring back to this committee. So that's why this meeting is so important today, because what we're really going to be focusing on is the last sentence where it says, with the further recommendation that staff study ESS size, complexity, voltage, and risk. And that's why we need all of your input this morning. The current plan would be to obtain information from you. If we need to do any additional follow-up, we'll do that. But to prepare draft regulatory language for the LEDGE Committee's review at a legislative committee meeting on November the 7th. Are there any questions regarding that?
Yeah, Chairman Fote, Registrar Fote, I want to just raise
Sorry,
again.
could you let us know if you're okay with being recorded, just for the record?
We have really a lot of bad feedback, Rick. I don't know. I don't know if there's any way to turn the volume. I think they have to do it in the back. This sounds a little bit better now.
That's okay. I bungled your title, so I'll start again. I am okay with being recorded. Thank you. So this is Bernadette. And Registrar Fote, I would appreciate being able to have a conversation about the scope of the motion that was passed by the Legislative Committee. I have the video teed up here, if it's possible to pull it up. I know the exact minute and seconds that the motion was amended. There was a friendly amendment that was accepted by the chair to expand the scope beyond just residential. I'd like the opportunity to review that with you, and if you can clarify for me how it's possible staff summarized that motion as being limited to residential, given what transpired at that committee hearing.
Well, yeah, I would entertain reviewing that. Do you have it? You said you could put
I have
it
it
up?
teed up on my computer. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it. I can try to see if...
Since we're here to actually discuss the scope of the study that they directed the staff to do, what I would suggest is that perhaps you schedule a separate meeting with the registrar to discuss the motion.
Exactly.
That would be my suggestion, because we have only a few hours today to discuss the main issues that the committee asked us to study, and I want to make sure that we actually use our time to the benefit of that study that the committee asked you to do. That would be my suggestion. But, I mean, if you want to schedule another meeting to discuss that issue, I mean, it's your meeting, Registrar, so I'll defer to you. But I think we're here to actually get testimony and expert opinion on the motion and the scope of the study that the committee asked us to do.
Bernadette, how about if we stick with the agenda, then after we finish, we can go over that motion and review it. I would like to see that.
Mr. Register,
Yeah.
if I might, I'm okay being recorded, Scott Wetch. We object to that because there was ample time between the time of the hearing, the notice of this meeting for Bernadette to raise these issues, for all parties to then make filings and bring folks prepared to speak to that point. So for that now to be raised literally at the 11th hour as we're about to have this discussion is inappropriate, out of order, and we have an issue with it.
This is Donald Simon, General Counsel for CALSA, and I am fine being recorded. Thank you. We are fine going forward with the meeting as agended. The point that we wish to make can be simply verified by looking at the video, which we can do with you later. But just for the record, since we are being recorded, our point is that when you listen to the video and the people that were in attendance at that meeting, it was clear that it was delegated to staff not only to come up with defined parameters around a proposed regulation, but that also included whether it would be limited to the C46 would be limited to residential or commercial and other types of construction beyond residential. So that's the only point we want to make for now. We're fine going forward with the agenda as set, but we would like an opportunity to speak with you about that at a soon date, because that obviously has a big impact on the scope of the regulations you will be drafting.
Can I also respond to Mr. Wetch's comment? This is Bernadette again. It wasn't until last Tuesday when the full board actually voted on the minutes to that August 6th meeting that it came to light that the motion was was recorded in such a way as to limit the scope to residential. So this was 1 week ago. I testified at that hearing and raised this issue then, and it was not addressed. So I'm raising it again, and I beg to differ. It's not the 11th hour. This is a perfectly legitimate time to be raising the scope of the staff's work in anticipation of the legislative committee's consideration of these regulations.
Final point for the record, Mr. Register, then I would stipulate that the full board's already addressed this issue and dismissed it, so it's not really appropriate for this forum. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to get back on the agenda.
have
I'd be
one
happy
other
to
question.
review this with you after the meeting.
Dave, I have one other question.
Sure.
As it relates to that issue, it's Eddie Bernacchi on behalf of National Electrical Contractors Association. I'm okay with being recorded. As it relates to that issue, it's my understanding that the motion that is in our agenda today was adopted, or the minutes were approved by the full board at the last board meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 2. Agenda item 2 is just a recap of a meeting that some staff with Mike Gimneski, Christy Shield, and I had with the California building officials. Also, Bob Raymer, representing the California Building Industry Association, was present for that meeting. And you have a handout that's a recap of that. The reason for this is they being Calbo, had written a letter that was quite specific, that their position was that battery energy storage systems should only be installed by C10 contractors. At the Ledge Committee meeting on August the 6th, they had a representative there that spoke in favor of option number 2, which is really what we're talking about here. And option number 2 was for the C46 to be able or authorized to install it in residential with certain restrictions. So a meeting was held. It was fairly informal. It was to get any further feedback from them. We have a list of who was present in person at that meeting, but there were also other individuals on the phone. And what happened, how that meeting concluded was with the building officials stating that, in general, C46s, in their opinion, could be authorized to perform battery energy storage system when it's paired with photovoltaic on residential installations, assuming that residential installation fell within what they call R2 and R3. After the meeting, we drafted this document and we sent that to them and said, does this adequately reflect what you said? And they told us that it did. And that's why we're making it public today, just for your information. Now, we didn't really get into the complexity and the size of the systems, or they didn't give us information regarding that, and that's why your information today is going to be so important. They did explain that they've encountered problems when the energy storage system is installed after the fact, not so much when it's installed at the time the photovoltaic system is installed. I don't know, Christy or Mike, if you want to share anything on that? About the meeting?
Yeah, other than what you just mentioned, the comment about the fire assemblies and the respective knowledge and experience came up as well.
Are there any questions regarding that agenda item?
Yeah, I'm just now seeing the summary that was provided there at the door. I don't see any reference to the fire assemblies. Can you elaborate? We're confused as to what the relevance is to this issue of that particular, or what that bullet point even means.
The fourth bullet point mentions the need to pass conductors through or breach fire-resistant assemblies during the course of installation and layered occupancies. So the concern was that in R1 and R4 structures, which are more stacked with regard to their individual occupancies, there's a certain amount of breaching fire-resistant assemblies that's necessary for the installation, and that's less of a concern with 2 and 3 residential occupancies, and that's what we were told.
I would question that right off the bat. Why would I have to breach fire-rated assemblies in a stacked unit? It's no different than doing PV on a stacked unit. My conduit's going to be external. I'm okay being recorded. Yeah, this is Mark Rodriguez from Sunrun and Kelsa. I just don't understand the reference of why a stacked apartment means I have to break fire-rated assemblies. My conduit and conductor runs can be external to a building, so there's no reason for me to penetrate a fire-rated assembly or breach a fire-rated assembly.
Yeah, if I just comment on that, the discussion was along the lines of when is it important that, say, a certified electrician would be performing this work, and where they brought that up is when you are breaching it. In general, they were saying that for the R2 and R3 dwellings, you don't need to breach it, and because of that, that's why they were okay with the C46 and not having the electrician certification requirement for those type of installations, because as you point out, you wouldn't be breaching it.
This is Martin from Sunlight and Power. I am okay being recorded. I think there's not a really good understanding of how multi-level buildings are actually built and constructed and supplied with electrical conduits and electrical service. The main service gear on a standard apartment building, except for master meter apartment buildings, which are no longer code compliant, comes into the building and hits a meter bank. And that meter bank then distributes electricity through conductors up to the individual unit service panels. If you are intending to do a solar PV system or a battery storage system that offsets tenant load, you don't attach it to the individual tenants. You attach it to the main service panel that is, either outside or in a parking garage or not enclosed within a fire-rated assembly that would need to be breached and inside the unit. I don't think anybody intends to install a bunch of batteries inside somebody's bedroom. Is that kind of the point? It goes outside or in the door. It's just kind of not how it's done. So I don't see where this misunderstanding came from. These folks that are supplying the information, have they seen and permitted these installations? Is there any data to show that there's a risk of that fire assembly being breached after the fact? I have seen, other, ways of doing things, but this is not typical within the solar industry and with the battery storage industry.
Captain Richard Burt, Solar and Fire Education. I am comfortable being recorded. Just to the point they're making about the conduit runs too, for the firefighter safety and civilian safety and for controlling utilities on a residential apartment working fire, that standard they follow is the best practice for us where the conduit is on the outside and does go to the meter. So from the safety aspect, they are actually following the procedure, and it actually is the best way to do that correctly. So breaching is not part of their plan, which increases firefighter and civilian safety.
Yes, Cliff Ishii, I approve being recorded. I'm kind of amazed at this discussion right now as being germane to anything that's relevant to what the committee's trying to do. These are, sure, if you run the conduit on the outside of a multi-story building, you don't breach any fire barrier. But when you do, if you happen to go inside and you do, it is pretty important to have fire safety in there to keep everybody safe. It just takes one mistake to kill one person to make this rule important to understand, rather than debate of how many times you do it, how many times you don't do it. Lives and safety and fire protection is number one.
To that end, we would install safety-listed equipment per the building code, per the residential code. Doesn't matter what contractor's license installs that, it's still the same system. Still has to follow the same codes and requirements. I thought we were discussing about how the electrical parameters of an energy storage system need to be installed by a qualified electrician holding a C10 license. Breaching a fire assembly it's not the same thing, not the same end.
With all due respect, I was responding to how you initially started this conversation.
Well, absent evidence that people are actually installing systems of this nature by breaching fire assemblies, I don't see any basis for creating a distinction that says C46s cannot install in a certain type of building classification that is beyond 2 stories or 3 stories tall. There's been no evidence that we've heard of, and you've actually had evidence introduced by two of the largest solar contractors that have done most of this work saying that's simply not the way that it's done. And beyond that, it would seem that this is an artificial restriction to impose on the C-46 to say that they cannot do multifamily, large-story buildings because apparently there's a presumption that a C-10 is more classified to properly seal a penetration through a firewall barrier than a C-46. But again, what is the evidence to support that? They all have to follow the same code, and that is a standard construction methodology that is taught that is not unique to electricians or anyone else. Plumbers have to do the same thing. So if the board is considering a restriction that limits C-46s to only work on certain types of residential buildings, this classification does not seem supported by any evidence whatsoever and would seem to be an artificial restriction to knock the C-46 out of yet more aspects of the work that they're currently doing and have been doing for years.
Okay, well, one more?
Just Tom Enzo, I consent to be recorded. I was just going to note that, we were on number 2, which was the recap, which I think you have done. I don't know if we want to move, it feels like we're moving on to number 3.
Yeah, I think we are too. This is just a recap of the meeting. Again, we're not there to influence them or anything else other than get information. This is what they said. You have a summary of it. If you disagree or you don't disagree.
This is Bernadette again. Register vote, I just want to register our, I think what you're hearing from the industry is that this summary is, raises more questions than it answers for us. We would like the opportunity to have a follow-up meeting with CSLB staff and Calbo to explore their concerns about the C-46 license further. We've never had that opportunity, and this is what, the fact that it's part of today's agenda tells me that their input to CSLB staff is incredibly important to the development of these regulations. We would like the opportunity to dig in and ask more questions and understand Calbo's position here, because again, this document is, we see a lot of errors and or misunderstandings that need to be clarified.
All right, so with that, one more? Okay.
This is Bernie Cotlier, and I'm okay with being recorded. I'd like to object on the record to Bernadette's characterization of speaking for the industry. They only speak for half of the industry.
Okay. All right, well, thank you all for your comments on agenda item number 2. And with that, I'd like to move on to agenda item number 3, which is really the very important part of, it's a very important part of this meeting. And we're going to begin with Bernadette Zoccaro with the presentation.
I'm sorry, David. There was on the agenda under 2C, there's the important issue about modifying existing PV systems with storage. Can you or somebody on your team elaborate about Calbo's position on that issue? Can we discuss that?
I mentioned it earlier. Their position was that they don't see as many problems being code violations or workmanship issues when the battery energy storage system is installed at the same time as the photovoltaic. So that was their comment, that when a contractor is returning or putting in a battery energy storage system on an existing system where they didn't install it, they are seeing problems. Now, did they provide us any data for that? No, they did not. So after this meeting, we'll decide what more we need to do. But at that meeting, that's just a statement they made.
So this has been an issue that CALSA requested a meeting with the CSLB to discuss, because CSLB, in I believe it was only a year ago, we saw the letter where CSLB took the position that under current law, the C-46 is not permitted to install a battery storage system unless it is part of a simultaneous project that includes the installation of a photovoltaic system. And we have wanted to discuss that with you because that is creating major problems throughout the industry today. And we see no basis under the law for implementing that change in the law without going through regulatory rulemaking. And the premise of it is very simple. Storage has been part of solar since the earliest systems were installed, because solar was first deployed when you lived off the grid. And so you had to have batteries as part of that. For the last 40 years, battery systems have been part of some solar systems. And so when CSLB recently wrote the letter stating its interpretation, it was turning existing law on its head. And we've wanted to have an explanation for the justification for that, because it seems to be in violation of the law, because it is changing established practice that has been known throughout the industry and known to the license board for at least 40 years, to suddenly say that storage can only now be done as part of a simultaneous PV project instead of a contractor going back to a PV system and adding storage at a later date. And we would be very interested to understand CSLB's rationale for that, because the letters that have been written by CSLB so far simply state it in a conclusory fashion without providing any analysis to explain that position that represents a change of 40 years of practice.
So I would just request that we stick to what's on the agenda, because we've been asked by the legislative committee to study the issues set forth in the motion. So any issues that are not related to this agenda, I'd request that we discuss offline in a separate discussion with the registrar. But for now, we would request that we stick to the agenda so that we can get information and study this issue as directed by the legislative committee.
So this was on your agenda, so I'm not understanding why this, was the agenda simply to-
The board's current interpretation and the letters that were sent out recently are not on the agenda. So I'm not sure I understand why you're bringing up this interpretation issue, because again, we're here to collect information regarding restriction relating to the motion that was passed by the legislative committee. And so if we could please focus on that, and whatever information you'd like to provide on that, we'd be happy to hear it.
Okay, well, it's item 2C. That's how we read the agenda that you sent to us, and that's why we thought this was an issue that was going to be discussed today.
Item 2C is the Calbo
It's just a recap of
opinion
the meeting.
on whether they believe that there should be restriction based on whether you're pairing or doing a standalone system. That was their opinion that we're just bringing forth and sharing with the stakeholders. It's not the CSLB's regulation and their interpretation. It's Calbo's opinion regarding how their concerns regarding installation with a paired system versus separate standalone installation.
Okay, well, with that clarification, we're fine with moving forward. However, could we get a commitment that we could have a meeting with relevant personnel to discuss this, because we've been asking for that for over 3 months, and we've not made any progress, and it is of great utter importance to the industry, and we've not had a chance to be heard or to understand the board's analysis on that. So is that something we could schedule a supplemental meeting for, to discuss?
Well, we're going to get back on the agenda. You made the request, and we'll respond to
Okay.
your request.
Okay, thank you.
Is that fair enough? So let's move on.
I'd like to interject something here really quick. Matt Stoutenberg, I'm okay being recorded. It mentions 40 years of doing battery storage. It's pretty safe to say that this energy industry is dynamic and rapidly changing. The last 40 years is really no indicator of the next 40 years.
Yeah, I just want to comment on something Christie said, because it was really spot on. The purpose of this meeting is to get information from you that we can use for our study to bring back to the Ledge Committee. So we really need to move on to agenda item number 3. And Bernadette, you were going to lead this off with your presentation.
I just have one comment. I mean, we're talking about, this is Barry Cinnamon, it's okay to record me. We're talking not about the industry here, but we're talking about California and the emergencies that we have in terms of life safety and fires. And to put restrictions on qualified companies and people to bail out citizens in need who are in Class 2 and Class 3 fire zones is something that hurts the entire state, not that industry or this industry.
I only have 4 or 5 slides here to provide some background on the market. Part of what we want to talk about here is what is being installed today and by whom, and the different market segments and system sizes that are being installed safely and without incident today. So there's a little bit, looks like already some transition between computer issues, but I think you'll mostly be able to capture from this slide that California, this is total solar energy capacity installed by market segment. That largest piece of the pie, 59%, is utility scale solar. That piece that you can see visibly, 16%, is commercial customer-sided solar. And the piece that's missing is residential customer-sided solar. So if you look at the entire pie of solar energy installed in California, both in front and behind the meter, you'll see it's about 60% utility scale projects and 40% customer-sided. In order to meet California's ambitious clean energy and climate change goals, in order to protect the state from ongoing fire risk and create a more reliable grid, California needs to build and expand all sections of this pie. And to restrict the market today, right at the point where we're trying to meet these ambitious goals and protect the state from climate change, is really heading in the wrong direction, especially when there's no evidence to justify and support doing so. This next slide is storage capacity. So this is mostly, as you can see, utility scale. I do want to note that this pie does include projects that are under contract but not yet built. It does illustrate, however, that about 10% only of the storage market is behind the meter. This is grid-tied, not off-grid, and it's a market that is growing and needs to grow rapidly in order to meet the needs of consumers and the needs of the state from a climate change perspective. This is a little bit hard to read also in this format, but what you see here is solar capacity by size and market segment. What I wanted to do, since a lot of the board members stated repeatedly at the August 6th board meeting, committee meeting rather, that they don't even know what a megawatt or a kilowatt is. They really were not able to have a conversation from the dais about restricting this important trade and this important industry. I thought it would be helpful to present all of those pies that I showed you, that big pie at the very first slide, now parsed out by technology size. So the point here is to show a couple things. One is, at that August 6th meeting, I made reference, because I was asked on the spot by the chairman where I think a fair line is on large versus small. I said 1 megawatt. That is, as you can see, halfway. There's plenty of capacity being built that is above a megawatt, and capacity being built that's below a megawatt. These are, again, commercial and residential all the way down the line, and also some large commercial systems above 1 megawatt. As one of the experts, trainers that came and testified on August 6th mentioned, right now, currently, C46, along with General A, B, and the C10 contractors are able to install really unlimited size of solar behind the meter. And again, as you can see here, we do have some customers in California that have quite a sizable load, electricity load, and are putting in some really big systems. But again, even they are nothing compared to the large utility scale projects that are primarily being built by the utilities and contracts, subcontractors directly with the utilities.
Bernadette, can I ask one question?
Sure.
About that slide? Eddie Bernacchi again. This is in regards to solar and not storage, correct?
I'm getting to that.
Okay, I was just getting
Yeah,
clarification.
but the reason why I think it's important to understand the solar market is because we're talking about solar paired with storage and storage paired with solar. And so where storage is headed and where the market is headed is the pairing of those two technologies. To restrict one is to restrict the other. It also just gives the board a sense of what is being built today and a sense of size, system sizes, and where the market is and where it will go in terms of storage. Okay, this next one is customer-sided. It just hones in on the customer-sided storage capacity. So again, this one is inclusive of utility scale. This one just hones in on the behind-the-meter projects. So this one you can see a little bit more clearly. Again, this is capacity systems under 10 kW I want to note here that there are a significant number of commercial systems that are under 10 kilowatts in size. And this little mini chart here gives you the number of them. So you can see here there were 7,813 commercial projects that were under 10 kilowatts in size. I raised this for the obvious reason that these technologies, these systems, are identical in nature. And we have experts here today that will elaborate on that. But to suggest that a contractor is capable of installing a 10 kilowatt system on a home, but is incapable of installing that exact same technology and system on a small commercial property is arbitrary. And there's no basis in fact for that, and no reason to restrict that contractor from servicing the entire industry and the entire marketplace available to him or her. And I want to actually pause on this. For small contractors, restricting their market to just one type of customer is going to break their ability to stay in business. This is particularly true in some of our rural areas. You can't just focus and specialize in the residential market. There simply aren't enough homes to stay in business. You need to diversify. Most of our small contractors that make up the bulk of this industry and the bulk of the companies supported by the solar industry diversify in what they do. They're not just pure play residential. It's actually pretty rare to have a pure play residential company. So this is a very important. While that's a small area of color there, you can see it's a significant number of installs. And for small businesses, trying to stay competitive in this market and providing important jobs and important economic opportunities in some of our more rural and disadvantaged communities, this is really important to us.
Just for the record, Burnett, could I ask, because we're taking notes, what's the citations for all this data, each of these
This is
slides?
all publicly available interconnection data.
Can you provide to the group the citations after the fact so we could look and verify these numbers?
Brad Hebner with CalSA, and it's okay to record me. There are three main sources for all of this data. The California Solar Statistics, which is kept by the CPUC, the RPS database, which has public data, and the AB 2514 reports from the utilities on utility scale storage.
Thanks.
So again, you can see the next system size up is 10 kilowatts to 30 kilowatts. Again, the orangish color is residential, and the blue color is commercial. So again, there are a significant number of commercial projects that are in that size range, and importantly, a huge number of residential, in fact, 54,471 that are in that 10 to 30 kilowatt range. And then again, you can kind of go from there. I don't need to repeat, here for everybody to see, but you can imagine this is just basically the size like I identified in the previous slide. Let me go to the next slide. Again, this is for grid tied only. So now this is data on customer cited solar paired storage. So it's not standalone storage that isn't paired with a PV system, and it's only customer sided. This data for utility scale storage that is paired needs a little bit more digging and a little bit more work in terms of what the utilities are reporting. So we provide only the customer sided, but obviously that is really what we're focused on today anyway. What you can see here is, again, you have commercial projects that are in the very small 10 kilowatt range. This is a battery size now. You have a lot of residential that are in the 10 kilowatt, but you also have a lot of residential that are 10 to 30, as well as commercial that are in that size range. It flips a little bit. 30 to 100, you do have some residential systems that are significant in size. Those are big homes that have a lot of battery backup capabilities. And then you even have a handful of systems in the 100 to 500 kilowatt range, believe it or not, that are residential. So again, the point being here that if you look at the market and you understand the technology, applying a restriction to contractors based on customer class is not based in any technological reality or marketplace reality. Customer cited solar paired storage by license class. So we've talked about this a lot over the past 18 months, and being with the CSLB on this issue, again, some of these bars are missing on the projection here. But suffice it to say, these are contractors that hold a C46 license. They are doing the vast majority of work installing, and each bar is a system size. So these are under 10K, and it goes all the way up to that bar, which is 1 megawatt to 3 megawatt. Contractors that hold a solar specialty license are doing the vast majority of solar paired storage work in the state of California. You would be restricting the companies that have the most experience doing the work without incident if you adopted regulations that restrict the C46 license from installing solar paired storage.
Bernadette, can I ask a question on that item as well? Does that C46 classification of bars there, again, this is Eddie Bernanke of NECA, does that include C46 contractors that also, in addition to their C46 license, carry a C10 license? It does.
As well as some A's and some B's.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Bernadette, can I ask you a question? This is Dan Cohey, Morro Meadows, and I agree to be recorded. Did you state that the systems used in residential are the same systems that are being installed in 1 megawatt installations?
I did not state that, no. Thank you for the opportunity to elaborate on that further. What I stated was that a 10 kilowatt system in a commercial property is virtually the same as a 10 kilowatt system on a residential property. The customer class, the zoning classification, is actually not significantly relevant to the size, the voltage, the complexity of the system being installed.
Well, on a residential system, you're what, at a 10K AIC rating of the panel? Doesn't matter, small, right? In commercial installations, you're 3-phase 480 up to 65,000, complete different classification. You know, what's triggering the changes in this industry? You've got the CFC codes, you've got the NEC codes, you've got the AHJs enforcing this. Everything is changing and adopting to this. This legacy of just applying this going forward, it's not applicable to what we're seeing in the real world.
Burnett, just a point of clarification on that slide. That was the number of projects. The last slide, when you broke it down by C46s, that was not the load, but it was, those bars were based on the number of projects. Is that your contention?
I believe that's correct.
So earlier in your presentation with the pies, you were basing the graphs on the amount of energy produced, but now it's on the number of projects, just for the record.
Let me double check that, and I'll get back to you, Scott. In the meantime, I'd like to invite Barry and Mark to address Dan's question.
This is Barry Cinnamon. Dan, almost all of the new construction work we're doing has homes with service panels ranging from 400, I've seen up to 800 amps. So what's going on in the field for small commercial is exactly the same as small as residential, and there's plenty of residential systems that are much bigger than commercial systems.
And this is Mark Rodriguez. I think the question we're talking about here is size and complexity of the ESS system. So the National Electrical Code has already defined where size and complexity changes for a PV system, and that's under Article 691 large-scale PV, and that starts at 5 megawatts. So if you want to make a distinction there, I think Bernadette's being very generous in setting a line at 1 megawatt, because it's not even codified at that. However, looking at integration of a solar system into a commercial property, like she's right, the same system sizes we could use on a PV plus storage are applicable both to residential and commercial properties. We still have simple formulas that we can follow to do interconnection of a PV system, even on a 600 amp panel. The math is still relatively easy. There are times where the installation may require the work of a professional engineer, electrical engineer to help us. But I think that's still within the realm of that contractor to follow and adhere to.
You know what I'm seeing here, and I know Tesla's here, and we're bidding a couple systems right now. I mean, we're seeing work in the 12 kV, 15 kV as part of these systems in metering. You know, that's a lot different than a small residential system. I don't care what kind of amperage.
It's interesting, Brad Hefner, interesting to bring up the voltage of what it's connecting to in terms of transmission lines. It's the first I've heard a suggestion that storage connected directly to distribution system or transmission system should be treated differently. It sounds like that's what you're referring to.
I'm just referring to, you're working in high voltage sections at this point. I mean, you're putting Rogowski coils into metering sections on the 12 kV side on a commercial building. You're not doing that in residential.
And for the record, the California Coalition of Utility Employees, as well as the 3 IOUs in the state, have raised concerns at all of these hearings relative to systems directly connected to the distribution system and the safety issues around backfeed that are very real to the men and women that I represent.
Can I get a point of clarification from staff? I feel as if this discussion is heading in a direction to debate whether or not the residential market should be included or not included only. Again, looking at the motion that was passed in the minutes by the board, we're here today to establish, based on size, voltage, and complexity and risk, a line in the sand in the residential market. So I'm saying this seems to be a little bit outside of that realm.
I think the issue is that no risk has been demonstrated from the other side. So we don't really know what we're fighting against.
So Bernadette, what do you have left? Is any additional? That's in your slides? Okay. Well, thank
Ms.
you.
Shielda, I know that you had a question or a comment earlier, but you were cut off.
Thank you. I think the question was asked and answered. So thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, so.
Register vote. One more bit of information to put on the record is we've done some calculation on the cost impacts of the proposed regulation, and glad to follow up with staff with detail on how they were derived. But according to, we've worked with a lot of our member companies to come up with typical wage information and hours it takes to install things and other impacts that this regulation would have. And the result is $25 million in 2020 alone just for wage related directly to storage installations, growing to $677 million from 2020 to 2030. And then including all direct impacts of the regulation, other impacts on companies that would directly result from this change in regulation, $112 million in 2020, which is well over $1 billion for the period from 2020 to 2030.
Comments? I have a question.
Well, we'll be reaching out to
Can I
people
get a
later.
clarification? Was that assumption based on a total ban of
That-
commercial and just a?
That's based
what,
on
or R2, R3, or what's the assumption based on that
a
calculation?
requirement of C10 across the board, including residential.
So a total ban?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Register, on that point, if they're going to provide testimony to this panel, this fact-finding panel, on a wildly huge cost estimate like that, they have to do that should be required to do that in writing with their methodology so that the board can then evaluate it on its face with allowing other parties to respond to what may or may not be accurate calculations of those figures. It's utterly outrageous to provide that in verbal testimony without providing a written finding.
We agree that the follow-up should happen, and that process should absolutely happen.
Okay, yes. So moving on, Eddie, you guys, your C10 Industries up next.
Commissioner, I just wanted to say register one more thing here. R2 and R3, getting to that, again, this concept that Calbo has presented, it's my understanding that R2, correct me if I'm wrong, but that includes multifamily housing projects, is that correct?
Mike, is that your understanding? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Martin, from Sunlight and Power, can you just speak to, or Kyle or Nick from Tesla, one of you, can you speak to the typical size of systems that are installed on multifamily housing projects today?